React.js. Week 2, day 4. So yeah, it's Thursday morning. You've been working hard on the Instagram clone project. So part of what you've been building is this clone of the Instagram web application. So basically you have 3 objects on an array that have all this data that you're working with. And your goal has been over the last few days to kind of come up with a way to put this all together using React.js. The styling or the components library. It's like Andrew was first on our questions and answers thread. I'm going to ignore the question for now. Okay, so awesome. So your task yesterday was to stop where you are currently at on day 3 and begin on fiddling around with authentication, fake authentication. This is not an authentication system. The disclaimer needs to be said that this is not an authentication system. It's totally faked. But the principle behind what you were building is this idea of higher order components. So much like functions in JavaScript, because our components pretty much are functions, okay? We learned that on React day 1 when we were able to see that we could just invoke a functional component and it would mount the return JSX to the screen, right? We can invoke a component and simply pass a component to that component invocation as an argument. The same way we can do it with a function. We can invoke a function by passing another function as that function's argument. So a function that takes a function as an argument is known as a higher order component. And this is really nifty. I showed you a use case for it being nifty in terms of reusability. So we can mimic the functionality and all the guts of a component and reuse it across multiple different in multiple different contexts. And that's kind of the one of the major benefits. Another one of the major benefits is that maybe you want to encapsulate that component with some sort of formal logic. Okay, so let's start from the ground up on this little project, and I'm going to delete the item in memory that is the user. So let me go ahead and delete that. Notice that I have my comments stored in memory as well. So if you haven't been able to persist your comments, that's fine. It was more of a stretch problem anyway. But there is some built-in functionality to how to persist those comments in local storage. But yeah, notice that we're saving the key value is the image itself. And the value being the components or the comments of that post, right? So anyway, just an aside there. So nothing to get too worried about. So now if I actually go and refresh this page, I should have some logic that says, hey, this user is not authenticated. We don't have a key value pair for username in the local storage. So that being said, this is not how most traditional login systems work. There may be some information stored about the user in local storage, but all of this is done primarily on the server in terms of persistence and authentication, okay? Which you actually have a whole week on authentication, some security, things like that. But the idea here is that we have a fake login system, which if you see, this is just kind of I used Bootstrap to put this together rather quickly, this quick little login form with just some vanilla Bootstrap styles, pretty straightforward. I'll walk you through all of that, okay? So the first place we're gonna begin is this login form because the login form has functionality that's going to actually make the rest of our higher order component work, okay? So this is how everything works will be through this login page, okay? So on the login page, and you'll notice I just have very, very quick styles, nothing to be super excited about, but really we just have a form that comes from the React Strap library. By raise of emojis, how many of you have used React Strap? so far in this project. Just curious to see if anyone has gone a step ahead and looked into it. Catherine, Justin gave me a no. Couple people. Okay, so it's pretty easy to set up. In fact, I'm going to walk us through the setup on that today in a vanilla project so you can see how that works, because it's kind of nifty and there's a lot of cool things that it grants us, and we'll go over why you would want to learn something like that. Okay, so you'll notice that all of my components here, they actually come from React Strap component library. So capital form, form group, input, and out of the box we get some actual styling, some responsive styling and things like that as well that are it's pretty nice to have with us. But yeah, at face value, this form's pretty dang ugly. It's just something I threw together. So I would have expected you, who are CSS masters at this point, to have surpassed my form making abilities. But yeah, this idea is just, we're using React Strap. I extend it with a couple of extra styles that I gave it and things like that. Okay. Now, once we log in, what's going to happen is we're going to click this login button, and on click, it's going to hit this little login handler. Okay. We collect a username and password. I don't do anything with the password. I only select the username. Okay. And then I use that to be submitted to local storage. So what I do is I grab that username from state, and then I say create a item in local storage called user and set it equal to that username. So whatever is on state at that time, awesome. And then I force a location reload here. Why would I do that? Why would I force a location reload? Just out of curiosity. Yeah, we want to refresh the page. But why wouldn't I just let the form handle that submit for me with the default behavior of a form? Because doesn't form submitting actually refresh the page for me? Okay, so Jonathan had to use the form refresh because he's saying that he got global errors. I tried that. I cannot get to use global errors. Okay. Can I use global errors? Interesting. I haven't seen that yet. Am I getting errors in my console? Nope. Just a bunch of DevTool warnings. Okay. Well, either way, this is just a hack, right? We tap into the Windows Location API and just call reload on it. I was having problems when I originally approached this. It's like, oh, I'm just going to let the form submit it. I was having problems with what we call a race condition, meaning my code was refreshing before it got to this line. Okay. And so it was all the default was to refresh the page, and it was refreshing before I actually set the item. So I was never setting the item when I was trying it with just the original attempt. So if anyone else had that problem, maybe this could be a potential solution for you when you handle the submit. Okay. John used the lifecycle method. That's awesome. So set item is not async, but it wasn't a race condition in the fact that asynchronous stuff was happening. It's that basically my window was refreshing before I could actually hit that line of code is essentially what was happening. So it wasn't a race condition in the traditional sense, but in the sense of, hey, it was refreshing. Yeah, John, it'd be cool to see which lifecycle method you used for this type of handling, because that's awesome. That's total bonus points. But let's look at my handle input change function handler, because something funky is going on here. Okay, I want to point this out because it's at the point in when you've been using handlers and set state and things like that rather often. We learned yesterday about the controlled input, right? Where the value of the input is bound to the state that we find, which it will update. Okay, but I want you to pay attention to this property right here on our input fields. where name is set to username on the first one and name is set to password on the second one. So we have two input fields, and notice the function that they are both calling. Okay? So each input field is invoking the same handler function. So how does my handler function distinguish which one of these it should be setting? Because on change, this should be updating the username. On change, this should be updating the password. Well, the kicker is in this funky line of code right here. Okay? This is why values being controlled by the state on your input fields is actually really, really handy, because we get a chance to build reusable input handlers based on the target name, which will be bound to this, that gets sent through our event. So let's look at this computed property rather quickly, so that you can kind of see what's going on. If I had a variable called foo and set it equal to Ryan, okay? In memory, foo equals Ryan, so that means we have this memory, right? We have this ability to access this variable. If I call foo, if I invoke it, not invoke it, but if I reference it, it'll give me the string value that it has been assigned to, okay? So if I wanted to create an object literal, and I knew that the first property on that object literal was to be Ryan, okay, then I could compute any item that I have in memory or that is assigned a value by simply referencing it in brackets on an object. And then we're going to do this backwards here, and we're just going to say that the value of the Ryan property is going to be name. I know that this is Ryan property because I just barely declared this in memory. Okay, I just barely declared const foo equals Ryan. So my object is going to evaluate to Ryan as name is the value. So let's see what happens. So we just read the value and computed the value of the foo variable by passing it into the computed property syntax. This is an ES6 trick that actually comes in handy in a lot of use cases, especially in React. This is one of those reasons why I say React makes you a better JavaScript developer, because you see stuff like this, these little shortcuts, all day in React. Okay, and then you get a chance to look and see what in the name of Pete is going on there, because I've never seen anyone create a property on an object that looks like this. Okay, so in terms of what we're trying to do, we're trying to set state every time a user types in this input field to the e.target, which is this, target.name. Compute that property to username, and then that's what's going to be set right here. And then whatever gets typed in the value will be set on that string. So let's look at both of these under the hood, just so you have one more opportunity to see this. I'm actually really surprised that I'm not getting like a billion mind-blowing emojis, because this is such a cool idea. So I'm just going to say Ryan. Ooh, I meant to say name, not value. And then we'll say e.target.value. Thanks for the courtesy emojis. All right, I'm going to say Ryan here. Notice what e.target.name equates to from this input field. Okay, so username, R-Y-A-N. So Every single time we update, it's going to go and select that item on state and update that. Okay? And then I'm going to do the same thing with password, and it's going to answer Charles' question right now. Super secret. So why not just username equals e.target.value and password equals e.target.value? Well, if you notice my code, my implementation, I have one function handler that is being used for two inputs. The same exact function gets called for both inputs. I could have 500,000 inputs on my form, which that would suck. But this idea is that I can make them all use the same exact function handler, as long as they're just text inputs and they all behave the same. So you can use that method for username and password and any other future ones. Yep, John sums it up. So that's what a computed property is. Now you kind of have seen it. So anytime you see it in the future, you'll be like, oh, that's that thing that Ryan was talking about that one time. Because I promise you, you will see it. Not only will you see it, I recommend trying to use it, okay? The best place to figure out where to use it is just to Google the MDN docs and look for computed property. You'll see it right there. Okay, so that was sort of the login page. That's all the logic that needed to exist. So yeah, login should be good to go. From there, it's just a simple rinky-dink login form that was roughly styled with Bootstrap's base styles and some custom CSS. That beautiful gray background. Mwah, it's magnificent. Okay, so what do we do then next? What's our next thing? We have the login page built. We have our app built. Well, we needed to go and refactor app because there was a lot of state going on there that we're not going to use there anymore. Okay. So what because then we put all of our major state inside of the posts page, and we use this as sort of our main page now. Okay. Where app should then be the parent of the post page. So if app actually gets authenticated, if we are authenticated, then we will mount our app component. And notice what we are exporting as this component. We are exporting the authenticate component, passing in app in turn. So anytime we use app, no matter what, it's going to be wrapped in this authenticate component. And if you want to see right now how that's going on, take a peek at your React DevTools and notice that our entire app is then wrapped in a higher order component called class. And what's really fun about this is I can go and switch the state on and off, and it will mount and unmount my components. See how that's happening? So you can go right into the Chrome DevTools and change your state and see what happens to your app. So download those Chrome DevTools if you haven't already, and slap yourself for not downloading them when I prompted you. Just kidding. But yeah, if I log in, we're actually logged into the page. So really nice. It's a really nice tool there that you can kind of check your logic. So then where is that logic taking place that we are checking for a logged in or not, right? It's just a true or false. So is the user actually logged in? Well, let's dive into the code and figure that out, because everything happens in this authenticate higher order component. It's going to take an app because we're just going to wrap it with app. And then it's going to have some sort of state, right? The state is going to just be that toggle flag. And since our login component's job is to set a user in local storage, then refresh the page, then we're going to trigger this component did mount on page refresh. Okay? Because our authenticate component actually renders one or the other item. If this.state.loggedin is true, render our app. Otherwise, render the login page. And the logic for whether or not something is true or false happens on component did mount when we check if the user is found in local storage. And if that user is in local storage, then we'll set the logged in state to true, else it will be false, right? Or vice versa. Is false, it will be false, and else it'll be true. Okay? Just a simple toggler, and I'm sure there's a dozen ways you could clean this up, and I look forward to seeing some of your solutions to this. So yeah, it's just a really fun way to get you exposed to higher order components and the idea of compositional patterns in React. Because now you have work that is done by this anonymous class that two components can utilize, right? Two components, it's not that they'll utilize them. This component is either it's doing the logic for us. It's saying, hey, mount one or the other. So questions about the authenticate problem? And it sounds like, John, you did the same thing that I was doing. Does app on line 4 have to equal, does app on line 4 equal to app? So app, yes, this will be what we pass through this, right? This is going to be a variable. Otherwise, this would not be defined, right? Login page, we just simply import it in. It would be cool to figure out how to just wrap up the login page in this, which is, you know, step 2. But yeah, and then either mount the app or login page, whichever one should come in that way. Yep. Okay. All right, gang, let us shift gears then if we are not completely flabbergasted. So I'm going to create a React app by using npx. And create React app. We'll call this styled app. Because this morning, what we're going to be working on, what we're going to be learning about is how we use these third-party libraries like React and probably my favorite styling third-party library called styled components. It looks like a couple of questions came in. John said, I totally missed the export default, authenticate, so I had to do something else in authenticate. If logged in, post page inside of app or login page. Hey, that's not a bad idea either. You don't need to go back and fix that. If yours is working, that's fine. There is an infinite amount of paths to solutions in problems in computer programming. You have found a path. We don't need to worry about optimization there. Kyle said in this, paste some code. Do we need the user variable as opposed to just using this.state.username? Nope, you don't need the user variable. You could say this.state.username. It was just a way to simplify it a little bit or make it more complicated depends on which way you're looking at it. Okay. So we built a little project from scratch. You don't need to follow along here with me. I can get this up on Code Sandbox at the end of the lesson. Pretty much I don't have a follow along exercise or anything for you to try out this morning other than taking some time this morning to play around with these items. The last time that we taught this, we actually ended really early, like an hour early in the morning. Yeah, I'll zoom in, don't worry. We ended an hour early in the morning. So that way those who wanted to stick around and go through a Q&A could get that Q&A, and those who wanted to just jump right back into the assignment and finish it all up could go do that as well. So there is always plenty to do, and so we never, like, this week is a lot more just review over last week's material. If you've noticed, that's kind of how our lessons have gone, and introducing you to a few new things like high order components, and now styled components and things like that. Okay, so that's kind of the goal of this week, if you haven't caught on to that, is to just be a lot lighter in what we cover and allow you to go back over last week's stuff more, and a lot more focus, a lot more what we call at-bats. Okay. Okay, so we just boilerplated, we put together a little bootstrapped, we call it bootstrapped, meaning it was built with using like another library to be put together. Like all of these files were bootstrapped for us, meaning that they were put together for us out of the way. Somebody built this for us already, okay? I'm just gonna clean it up by getting rid of that register service worker, okay? And because we don't need it. And then I got rid of the logo so that we don't have problems when I deploy it to Code Sandbox later. And the test, because the test is annoying. And we don't need it right now. Okay, so if I were to boot this project up, meaning deploy or start our Webpack dev server, it's just gonna go and display on localhost 3000, hopefully. It's gonna go start our dev server for us, and we're gonna get a project that looks much like this. This is how Create React app works, right? It just boilerplates something for us like that. Okay. Don't need tons of real estate here, just a little bit. Okay, so the idea here is that we want to incorporate a third-party library like React Strap into this project. So if it doesn't matter how far along in the Instagram clone project you are, right? You could do this at any phase along the way. In fact, there's prompts, I believe, along the way for you to research and look into React Strap as you go along, or maybe styled components as you go along as well. So let's start with React Strap so that we can see how this one works. And then we'll move into styled components and see how that one works. They're both really cool libraries. They're both very different. So the difference between React Strap and React Bootstrap, if you've come across React Bootstrap already, is that React Strap actually utilizes React Bootstrap or Bootstrap version 4. Okay? So it's Bootstrap 4, and the cool thing about this library is that not only do you get style sheet included in your application for Bootstrap in general, you also get styled components, so components that are already built out for you using the Bootstrap pattern. Okay, so installation we're going to go through, it's pretty simple, but I wanted to walk you through how awesome the documentation is for it as well. So if I were to come here, you'd see that you could go to the GitHub project or click on components. Look at all the components. These are actual React components that you get out of the box by including something like React Strap into your project. Okay, and because we're teaching you about React Strap doesn't mean that there aren't other libraries out there that may or may not be inferior or superior to Bootstrap. But learning to work with React Strap will help you learn those libraries. So why do we teach you this? Why do we want you to know this? You will show up at a company that uses some sort of styling library. Maybe it's built in-house, customary. Maybe it's built as a third party, right? And they just include it in their application. You will face that at your day job sometime. And you'll have to learn how to work with that. There'll be documentation or somebody will teach you how to work with that library, okay? The documentation for React Strap is phenomenal. And so I want you to learn how to work with this, but there's other libraries out there like Material and things like that that you could also jump right into, having learned just a little bit of how to work with this. But really, it's just a matter of importing the library and then using it as the documentation says. For example, this little breadcrumbs component here could be broken down, and it's a component. So this top idea of home, notice what you get. You simply, once you have it included, you import each component from the React Strap package as its own thing, right? As its own compartmentalized piece of functionality. And then you build it and put it together as the example suggests, okay? So this active one is home, and yeah, it's just right here. It's already active, meaning it's grayed out, right? And look, they pass properties around as Booleans. This, by being on the component itself, will evaluate to true. If it's not there, then it's going to be false. It's going to be undefined, right? So by the fact that this is there, this is going to say that active is true. And then what the author of this component library can do is say, oh, is the user using the breadcrumb item component with the active flag? Is that true? Yes, then it's going to apply styling in a certain way. Now, how would you have ever guessed that? Well, look at the prop types. So this is why I say that the React Strap documentation is awesome, because they'll show you what you can use in terms of properties or props that you pass around to your components. Okay? So you can pass all of these as certain props. Breadcrumb item, oh, there's an active prop. It's not going to necessarily tell you what it's going to do, but you can kind of assume from a lot of the examples. Let's look at another one, like the modals that pop up. Modals are some of the funnest components to play around with, because building a custom modal really sucks. So this is a really cool functionality, right? The X and the cancel will toggle the show for this modal back to false, right? Otherwise you have a call to action, submit or whatever. And it looks like it's just toggling it back to false as well. So you see this toggle function, it's simply setting the state of the modal to the opposite of what the modal state was prior. Okay? And then they assign this toggle function as on click to the button or as the toggle on the modal itself. So these are all things you can dive into straight from the documentation, physically type stuff out and figure out on your own. Dustin's telling you that building modals suck. They do. Like you can click. So what's crazy about the modal is it's not just this piece that we're looking at here that has a title, some body, and then call to action, right? The modal also has this background like div that is overlapping and overshadowing the rest of our content. So you have to have the ability to bubble your events around and play around with it. So letting Bootstrap do that work for you is super awesome. Okay. So enough looking around at the documentation. Let's look at how we install this so you can start playing around with it already if you haven't. Okay. So in my terminal, inside of my styled app, I'm going to yarn add Bootstrap and React Strap. I need both because React Strap is the component library that relies on the style sheet that Bootstrap gives you, okay? Because I installed it through NPM, I can use it like any other module. Inside of my index.js file, I can go import it just like this. Import from Bootstrap dist CSS bootstrap.min.css. That file was just installed into my node modules when I ran yarn add bootstrap. Let's go prove that. Node modules. Scroll all the way down to Bootstrap. There it is. There's got to be a dist directory because that's what we're referring to here. There's got to be a CSS directory because that's what we're referring to here, and a file called bootstrap.min.css, and there it is. Bootstrap is now going to be imported as a style sheet for all of my application, right? So virtually what has changed? Well, if you look, my font has updated quite a bit already to the Bootstrap styles. I can tell because this is their traditional like font family that they use. But if I want to look at my head, I can come and see that on my style, my Bootstrap is included now in my index.html file. Webpack did that for me. really, really awesome that you don't have to touch Webpack when you're using Create React App. It just will do this stuff magically for you under the hood. Trevor asks a noob question, as he titles it, about it sucking to build a modal. Couldn't you make your own and keep reusing it? Like it would only really suck once. Yes, you could. But there's a lot of intricacies to modals that people don't always see at face value. So I recommend building one on your own. You have a project week coming up in a couple of weeks, and there's a modal in that project week. I recommend giving it a whack. Try and get it implemented with React Strap first, push up to your MVP, and then try and recreate it from scratch and see how far you get. A lot of people do create it from scratch and they find the problems that they run into. Maybe it's going to be easier for you, Trevor, than it is for me and Dustin. So that'd be awesome. Alberto said, for the node modules, can you delete files that you will not use? Yes, there is a way to do that automatically, Alberto. It's through this process in Webpack called tree shaking and code splitting. We're not going to get into any of that, but essentially there's a lot of JavaScript in a React application. And how do you determine what JavaScript should or should not be on the page? And there potentially may be conflicts, right? And performance issues. So Webpack actually allows you to say, I only need this when this page mounts. Everything else can be loaded later on, right? So it's kind of a nice thing. Arthur says, and then how about making in Vanilla.js? Do that. I take a stab at it, gang. Have fun with your modals. If you're doing it in Vanilla.js, your events, if you're using React, it's not good practices to select the DOM directly. Go through the virtual DOM. You'll use Vanilla.js for the logic, but you'll just set those handlers on the components in the JSX that you build. Because remember, JSX is not HTML. And there is another step between your React code and the actual DOM, your JSX HTML looking code and the DOM. So if you're going and you're trying to target the DOM directly, don't do that in most cases with React. React has the virtual DOM so that you don't have to do that. Just makes your life easier. Arthur says, still figuring out when to use Yarn versus NPM. Use Yarn. We use Yarn here at Lambda School. Why would we install using Yarn instead of NPM like the React Strap site instruction? Because they haven't updated their documentation. So yeah, just use the rule of thumb is use Yarn because you're in React world and the Facebook team built Yarn. So the two they play really well together. Okay, so just use Yarn, and knowing how to use Yarn, you'll be able to use NPM. If you go to a company that's like, we use NPM only, that's great. You'll know exactly what you're doing with NPM if you just understand how to use Yarn. So if you see a command that's like install via NPM, just know that that's saying Yarn add. Okay. These are good questions. Anything else before we move on? Okay, so let's see how we can get this to work. Yeah, there is a CDN to plug in instead. Now, CDN links are bad. That's how one of my companies that I worked for got hacked. They were using an outdated version of jQuery that had known vulnerabilities. Somebody got into the package and stole potentially millions of dollars, but it ended up being only hundreds of thousands of dollars. So CDN's not always good unless you want to maintain them. Okay. Cool. There is definitely a CDN link for Bootstrap, and you just put it right there in your index.html file. Bootstrap's pretty darn secure, so I'm not too worried about using CDN there. But yeah. Okay. So let's take a little tour of some of the things that we can do with the React Strap library. Where did I go with that? Those documentations. Okay, here we go. And we're just going to build one component that just uses we'll just use a button. Okay. So I'm going to put a couple buttons on the screen. And you'll notice that I already have a typo here because it's not a default object. These are non-default objects. Capital B for button, Get rid of that, and we're just going to say, put on the screen our button, and see what happens. Hooray, a nice gray button, all styled and basically the same as you could use it anywhere in your application. But now here's the cool thing. All you have to do to make this like function well is just add some properties like primary, and maybe I have to do this a little different way. So let's go check it out. I should look at the components and see what I need. Buttons, color is primary, color is secondary, color is success. So let's check it out. Color is primary. Fun, right? Just out of the box, I have a component. This is a React component. If I inspect it, you'll see that it will be a button. Okay, and it wraps the actual button that it's going to put on the screen. So it makes it all clickable and very nice and handy. If I wanted to make a bunch of these, I could do some success. I think danger is a prop for color. So right out of the box, I have styles that are built for me. You can customize a lot of these as well by adding your own class name to them. Some of them, they don't take class names too kindly, but if I wanted to customize, you can just add your simple class. So that really is as simple as React Strap is. Install it, okay? Add the Bootstrap package to your index.js so you have the style sheet globally, and then use your components like crazy. Any other questions or any questions at all about React Strap? I know that some of this was review for a lot of y'all, so you've been using it already, but this is just the crash course. The hope is that by now, you are getting more and more familiar and comfortable diving into new technologies through the documentation. The process at Lambda School is set up so that you have READMEs in your projects that are akin to documentation that you would see out in the real world. Step-by-step installation processes, okay? So yeah, if we have no questions, I mean, this isn't the most fascinating concept. It's actually pretty easy to implement. So not a lot of mind-bending techniques. Okay, all right. We're gonna shift gears now and we're gonna talk about this really cool package called styled components. Okay, basically the ability to write your components in a declarative way and add your own custom CSS to them out of the box. Okay. Before we shift gears, a question just came in from Kyle, and it's a long enough question that I probably didn't give enough pause to it. It's asking about the layout components that you get with Bootstrap. Okay. So Kyle's question is, could you please talk about the idiomatic way of using the React Strap grid system? Because I'm using it in my project right now, and I'm not sure when there's tons of nested components, where to use containers, rows, etc. Okay. So let's see here. This example, what's being printed above is this example right here. A container would be this whole outline where this gray line is containing your application. And then within that container, you could make a nice flexy container where your content, well, it's not really shifting because it's zoomed in maybe, where your nice content sort of shifts around in a flexy way. Let's see, maybe it's just, oh no, just an auto sizing. Yeah, it looks like some wrap is going on, okay? So the idea here is that you can use these variables, these attributes, okay? So if you look at this top column, this is your row, okay? Rows go left to right, and column goes top down. So if I picture that in terms of the grid, this right here, this one component is a row with a single column. Okay, and that single column is just simply going to be the entire width of the row. Kyle's question is more specific now, asking if each component should be wrapped in a container instead of a div like you often use to wrap everything within the render function. Containers have their own styling to them. So where could you find out how that works? Bootstrap container. Let's go back to Bootstrap v4. And documentation, containers. So remember, containers are the most basic layout element in Bootstrap, right? You can go and read all of this. Okay. So what would be the difference between a div who wraps or who uses the class container fluid or container versus not? Either way, it's going to be a div. You just get extra styles from it out of the box. So this, let's just try it. And I'm just going to change this to container. We'll get rid of our own class name on here. And we'll see what happens. Okay, let's see what this turns into. Maybe this will answer your question rather quicker, a lot more quickly. Notice that we lost our justification styles, and then we have these big fatty margins, right? But yeah, we have a nice little container. But let's look at the React, what actually gets built inside of this container, and it's going to default to a div. Okay, so my assumption now, if I were to inspect this container, is that it just gets div with the class container added to it. So this is kind of how React Bootstrap is built, where you just simply use the component, but that component will evaluate to something like this, right? So it's just a bunch of elements that are put together using the built-in Bootstrap styles. So if you want your code to be wrapped in containers, right, then you could most definitely use them to substitute wrapping it in just a vanilla div. It's going to equate to a div either way. One will just have a class name set to container and the other one not. Cool. Glad we could answer the question. And then everything else is as you know it, right? You can add rows. Each row, you could build your little grid system, adding rows and columns and things like that. And then just follow the examples here. You have extra small, small, SM and XS, right? And you could say that, you want to offset your columns in certain ways. So for example, when we get to this portion right here, we're saying that we're going to create a row of 3 columns whose offset is 3 on the outsides, and then auto on the center. And where are you going to figure out how to use this? Well, the props. Extra small, small, medium, large, extra large. So these are the column props. Okay, and because you know about prop types, you can kind of figure out what these do. But yeah, I think it's a 12-point system. I think that's what Bootstrap uses, but somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. Meaning in one single row, there can be 12 columns. And so if you divide things by, divide evenly into 12. So if you want 2 columns, you could do extra small 6 or whatever. Like this one is saying column 6. Column small 4, right? Those are the properties that are getting appended. So 4 even columns, 3 even columns that are of 4 value, right? So it's just a 12 system. Yeah, and Dustin has opinions on why 12 is the best. I've worked with other systems, and yeah, 12 does seem to be very Very nice. Gotcha. Oh, and CS12. Duh. 12. Okay, Kyle Meltzer. I hope I answered your question. It sounds like we were able to um, uh, to to move into that. So that's a very good question there. Okay, let's take a break before we dive in. We were going to take a break anyway before we dive into styled components because this one is a fun one, and there is some funky new syntax that we're going to get used to. That's going to make our lives really awesome. So let's take a fiver. We'll come back. And we should only need 20 or so minutes to put together styled components. Okay, welcome back, students. Okay, so remember, in the spirit of keeping things light this morning, we're just going to do sort of this. We did a crash course example of Bootstrap, React Strap. We're going to do the same thing for styled components. What is this thing? We're going to start in the documentation, and we're going to say, have fun with it. And you're actually the task this afternoon, once you've completed kind of the functionality of everything, is to go back and style everything using styled components. And you're just going to be able to see the approach here and see how it all works. Okay. So much like React Strap, the documentation for styled components is really awesome. If you look, you can go right in. You can see the basics. So what is this thing that I'm doing? There's a really cool video from this awesome guy named Max Stoiber who built this thing. He was like 19 when he started working on styled components. He's just a young buck, and he's awesome. He's an incredible guy. And you can see the different installation packages or examples and things like that, and then how to work with it. So we're going to do my preferred method of installing, and it's going to be very similar to React Bootstrap, where I just simply yarn add styled components. Okay, I'm just going to put this right into our application. And what it is, it's a higher order component. Okay, so what you get out of the box is the ability to use basically any sort of type of DOM element that will be converted into a DOM element on the styled function. So it's a big giant object. It's a big giant object called styled, or whatever you call it when you import it. Okay, so all you have to do is just import styled from styled components, and you have access to that object. Okay, and I believe it's just a global object, but I may be wrong on that, but we'll find out. And then instead of, say, maybe using this header, we're going to create our own declared header as a styled component. Okay, so it's a DOM element, so I can use it that it's found on the styled API. So I can now say const header equals styled.header. Okay, let's just console log that. Now, and see if we can get that in the console. I'm actually curious if this will work. Might have to do it inside of the render. Ah, look at that. It's a little function for us. And it's got this little CSS.apply thing. We're going to kind of go over some of this stuff. It's really, really cool. Okay. So this function header accepts a bunch of arguments. And one of the ways that we can now pass arguments to a function is by feeding them in as template literals. Okay. So it's a really fancy ES6 way to write a function. Style.foo, and then pass it some arguments. So we're going to pass it this template. The template is going to be CSS as you know it. Okay, so let's go and grab our app header from app.css, and let's convert this into a styled component. Those are the styles that we want. So I'm literally just going to delete that. Get rid of that class name. We're not going to even use this anymore. It's going to be called header now. Okay. And we're going to paste those styles into our function parameter. Okay. And that's virtually it. You can now write CSS inside of JavaScript. This is JavaScript. You can just write CSS right here in line. Why is this cool? Okay, why is this such a cool idea? Well, as soon as you get used to this pattern, you can write all of your components as styled components. So everything in React is about components. And we can also extend all of this to do other functionality for us. So everything in React is components. We're going to build components. So why not just use styled components as our own? So you don't need to worry as a developer when you jump into your project what your primary button needs to be, right? What does your only job is to just implement the button, okay? So if you have a reusable button that's found in, maybe you build this in your own component library somewhere and you export it, right? Then all you have to do is import from your library that button and you have access to it the way that you want to have access to it throughout the entire history of your application. You want to implement it once, or sorry, build it once and implement it everywhere many, many times. So let's look and see what happened under the hood here, and then we can pause for some questions. Because we're wrapped in this container, things still look kind of wonky, but if I inspect the element, we get this weird class that's going to be some gobbledygook right here. Going to be some string that we don't ever really need to know what's going on with it. But what's really, really cool is that on a component by component basis, styled components is going to go and create inline styles right here, optimized, packaged up, bundled up, and zipped up for every component that's on the screen. So not only do you have compartmentalized components, but the styles that come along with them, only when you need them, okay? And you can create these as globals as well, but normally for global styling in styled components, normally you would just use a global style sheet and reference it with class names, okay? Let's look here at some of the questions that are coming in. VS Code styled components extension, highly recommended if you decide to use styled components. Really cool. I didn't even know that was a thing. 10 points for the recommendation, as long as the recommendation's cool. Trevor said, presumably you can do some logic in there. Yes. Mike says, can you pass in variables? Yeah, let's check it out in just a second. Okay. John says, could you still pass it in the normal way as an argument wrapped around in parentheses? No, because this needs to be, so we're using template strings for very specific purpose here. It's because these will get evaluated to strings and pass through the styled components engine. So just use this syntax, okay? Are there any negatives to this approach? There are plenty of negatives. We can talk about those. Is a template literal, meaning you can interpolate JavaScript expressions with $, curly braces? That's the exact thing that we're going to get to next. So let me talk about the negatives to this. Like, what are the drawbacks? Well, I don't want to go into many details on that, but as your application grows and scales, sometimes this over compartmentalization of components and styles can get a little bit hairy. And then you end up with important tags and things like that that you may or may not have otherwise. There's other performance ideas. This is actually sometimes faster than mounting style sheets because it goes through JavaScript, and we can add performance enhancements to that. So those are some more other benefits that you get with styled components. The world is not set on CSS and JavaScript. The world doesn't see it. There's a divide is what I'm getting at. So if you want to dive into the pros and cons, it wouldn't take too much investigation to just, Google search for what are the pros and cons to CSS and JavaScript. We're showing you that this is a cool approach because it's kind of new age and really fun to use. And it, getting familiar with this, there may or may not be a time in your life that you will use it, right? Not everyone is adopting this, but there's other packages like Aphrodite and Radium, class names that use this kind of pattern. The coolest thing about styled components is that it's just CSS in these template literal strings. So what are some of the awesomeness things that we can do with that? Well, what if I have a prop that we could pass to this header component, because remember, header is now a component. So what if I had a prop that was like, and I have my props come in, right? And what if it said, and I'm going to make sure that I follow the syntax here so I don't bork everything up. Okay, so yeah, just like this, we can pass a function, and we can set that what evaluates to this function equal to this function. So I'm going to say background is set equal to now this function, right? So this will return, and we can do a quick ternary check to see if something is defined. So if I want to say that if, from props, if props.white is what I'll say, is true, then what I'm going to do is return one or another, right? So if props.white is true, we're going to return white. And I think I just need to do it as a string if I'm using the hex value. Else, return this hex value as the value of this background property. Does that make sense? So now I can use my header, okay, which is this is 222, right? Or I can use my white header. And I pass the Boolean, and notice my background is gone, but my text is still there. So I can do the same thing with my color value. So not only can I use just plain old vanilla CSS in these template strings, I can also evaluate for props that may or may not be found. And I can do this same logic, but just flip it, right? If props.white is defined, then give me the color of 222, whoops, or the background of white. So the color text is going to be, we're just going to invert it, right? So if I were to declare another one and not have white defined on it, I have two components that are completely custom based on one single property, right? They just are inverted in their styles. And it's that simple. It's the combination right here of simple evaluative statements like this that make this so powerful right out of the gate. And you can do anything else here. You can start typing in your media queries. You can say, select all H2 children elements and add their own styles, right? You can do whatever you want. And it's all CSS. And what's really neat about it is that you can do some simple evaluative statements. Okay, so let me get caught up on some of the questions that have come through now. So I answered Ash's question about the JavaScript expressions. Jonathan says, do you see or hear of companies adjusting to this method? Yep. You can go and check out who's using it. Blah, blah, blah. Let's see. Maybe it's under documentation, ecosystem. Max does a really good job to show you who is using this. Let's see. Who is using styled components? Big companies. There's a lot of big companies. Companies using? There it is. So he's active on Twitter, asking who's using it. But yeah, I know he compiles this information. I've seen a list. Then there's a million articles of why I don't use styled components. Built with styled components. Right there on their GitHub. Where I should have just checked in the first place. Cool. Do you worry about the developer getting so far away from the source of what's really going on under the hood that they become less independent and sharp as a result? I do worry. I worry about that all the time for my own personal career development. I don't worry about that in terms of what we're teaching you here, because what we're teaching you here is all super relevant to getting the job. And then your trajectory, your learning is going to just blow up on the job. And remember, this is not that abstracted because this is all plain vanilla CSS. It's just wrapping it in a really fancy trick, right? Cool. Alberto posted a cool article. Awesome. So did John. Looks like Dustin's chiming into a lot of these. Eric says, I like styled components, but I hate how it spreads out my styling between less and this. And that seems pretty sloppy to me. Yeah, so integrating this with other libraries, preprocessors might be a little bit tricky. So I've never done that before, so I don't know. Instagram uses it. Awesome. Cool. All right, so good conversation going on. Separation of concerns, HTML, CSS, and JS is now in the same file. So remember, Will, with React, we rethought best practices. Forever, everyone was scoffing at React for saying, "Oh, we're putting HTML and even inline styles originally in the same file as JavaScript." But that there's actually a lot of benefits to that, and it's the compartmentalization of your code. You could now quickly write an entire component library akin to React Bootstrap on your own by using styled components. You could put all of your styled components in their own file or directory and import the ones that you need when you need them and just reuse them over and over again. Wait until you get to Node. Uh-oh, someone's projecting there. Can you do your styling on your own page and import to separate code? I'm not sure if that's what you mean. So yeah, that's the idea. I mean, this is a component that we built, remember? So this could virtually be the de facto header component, and it could live in its own file somewhere, right? And it's just using some quick logic to determine what type it's going to render based on the color in the background. So you then could import header from your file of choice and use it as such. Okay. And yeah, things just tend to continue to get more and more awesome the more you dive into styled components. The more that you play around with the API itself. So some of the cool things that I want to show you are in the advanced section, of course. But yeah, you can look right here at what's granted with you. Theming is something that's really, really cool. Let's see here. I'm trying to find the right idea. Maybe it's not as advanced as I thought it was. Oh, styling any components. Okay, so check this out. So we have a custom component that's already built from this example called link, right? Link is just going to take in some props. It's going to have a class name and children as props. This is the same thing. This is the object destructuring, so don't get too caught up in what that's doing there. But it's the same thing as me typing in const equals props and then passing in props explicitly instead of destructuring along the way. Okay, that's the same thing as what's going on up there. And then this would be props right here. Okay, didn't need to save. So yeah, same idea. So now this link is going to simply return a class or an anchor tag as the class name that comes in is going to be tied to some class that you call it. And then the children will be whatever the nested children of the anchor tag will be. So link will wrap unstyled boring link, but then look how cool this is. So our styled link can now be, so we're going to create a styled link that's going to append these styles to the class of link by simply passing link into the function invocation there, right? So I can now, so imagine this. Imagine you have a bootstrap button that you want to change in one location of your application, right? Then go and just simply pass it and feed it into your styled button. And then you have link, which is just this being mounted to the screen. And then you have styled link, which is mounting the styled link component, but it's passing that link to it. So what is this called right here? You worked with this technique yesterday. What is this called? It's a higher order component. You're starting to see some of the patterns that you've been working with. And notice what happens just right out of the gate. So really fun opportunity there to extend some of the styles that you may or may not be working with. It's really fancy. Cool. Okay. So yeah, let's take a look at what the rest of your Instagram clone project entails, and I can definitely pause for more questions along the way. This stuff is so fun. So day 4, this is where you're bumping into. The idea is that you're going to be able to use styled components to add some functional styles. We're calling them functional styles to your React components, okay? And then, yeah, this was from yesterday, so we just need to switch those things around. So it's all focused on styled components, but we gave you a little crash course on Bootstrap as well if you care to use any of those. But I want you to focus on styled components first because it's just a new flavor of opportunity here. So the task, try and replace all of the styles you have previously written, change everything to be a styled component, except for where you need to reference your icon class name. So if you're using your icons and things like that, don't worry about styled components in those regards. Start by refactoring your search bar to use styled components. Here's the steps. Create a header styled component dot header that wraps your entire search bar. This could be styled or styled component because it's the default class. Okay. We recommend working left to right. So begin changing out your styles in the Instagram logo, then move on to logo header, styled component.div. And I'm using styled component, but you can use styled or SC or whatever you want to call this. I use styled. You'll see other conventions of using styled component. It's kind of what that's recommending there, or SC or whatever you want. Styled, you can name your class whatever you want as long as it's the default class, the default object. Okay. Create a logo image that's styled.component.image that fills in the background of your image. So refactor your post container component to only use styled components. So you're going to be walked through the approach here. So at the end of the day, all of your styles, there should not be a need for .css anymore in your application. Okay? If you have not gotten the functionality yet, today would be a good time to go back and start working on that functionality. And then get to styling after. We care about function over form now. Yesterday, that's why we had you implement that higher order component so that you could focus on that thing. Okay. Any questions before I let any of those who want to get started early on your project go? Any of those who want to stick around for a Q&A, stick around for a Q&A. Chomping at the bit. No one has any questions because they're just excited to roll. Okay, if you want to now, you can go ahead and jump right into the project. You can leave this meeting and go jump right into the project. And if you want to stick around, I'm here for a Q&A for the next half hour or so, or until questions run out. So this doesn't have to be about what we learned today. It could be about anything, any review that you want me to go over, anything you want me to cover. And yeah, we'll cover it. Still have most of you here, so I'm assuming you all want to stick around for a Q&A. So if you're here, think of a question you want to ask me. What is the most difficult thing that you're struggling with in React right now? Yeah, computed properties one more time. That's not a problem at all. Let's pull up a JSPin. Okay. So I have some variable. Let's say that okay. What is the value of foo? What does foo evaluate to? If I console.log foo, just to see what the value of it is, what's going to print in the console? It's going to be bar, right? The string bar. Okay. So foo is in memory. I can access foo whenever I want. I could write a function that takes in, let's say, printer that takes in some arg and returns the value of some arg. And I can invoke printer. I can console.log the invocation of printer and pass it foo. I get bar. Anywhere in my code, I can access this item, right? As long as I have the scoping capabilities to do so. Okay, so this is stored in memory. I can reference it whenever I want. We're referencing it right here by saying, hey, pass in some argument here. So the same type of thing, the same type of principle applies when you're using computed properties. Okay, whatever the value of the thing is that you're referencing inside of a computed property is what the property name will become on the object itself. So if I say const my obj and set it equal to the computed property of foo, and that's going to be, we'll just give it the string of foo. What is this going to compute to? What is this going to evaluate to? Whoops, missing semicolon. Should be fine. Should be able to do this. Let's see if it runs. You're telling me I have ES6, but then you're not letting me use it? Come on. Let's do it in the browser. So it's definitely an advanced feature. Advanced meaning it's not, their version of Babel is not using it, maybe just a preset. But yeah, what is foo going to be? What is this going to compute to on my object? What is my object going to look like when I print my object? Jordan got it right when she said that foo will compute, the computational value of foo will be evaluated in these braces, okay, which is the string bar. So bar now will be set equal to whatever you call it here. Cool. Yeah, so it's the same thing then with that. If I had an object, actually we're going to call it const event equals target equals an object dot name equals username and value equals whatever somebody had typed into that input field. So this is mimicking that kind of emitted event environment. And value would equal Ryan. Okay. So if I want to say event.target.name, it'll print out username. Event.target.value will be Ryan. So let's create our own object based on these things and the knowledge that we have of our computed property. So my computed object equals the computed property of event.target.name as event.target.value. Username is Ryan. We derived that from this object right here. Event.target.name was evaluated and computed to become this right here. And then the value is just whatever was set to the value. Event.target.value. And that will change in a input field that will change on change. So anytime a user types in there. Is there any deeper reason behind the braces syntax for the computed property? I remember realizing that the brace notation for accessing array elements is really just bracket notation for objects. So, and for brackets as well. So let's go over bracket notation. So we have our event object, and I want to select event at target, which is going to compute to, this is going to give me back what? It's going to give me back this object, right? So event.target is the equivalent of event.target. So there's two ways to reference items. Like that. So I don't know if there's a specific, because the syntax is different. We're not selecting an object and a property. What we're doing in this computed property statement is we are saying I want whatever is found at event, because this could be written in a different way, right? Because I could say at event, by that logic, I could say event at target at name, and at just referencing an address, right? And I get the same thing. It's just two different styles. The concept of this is really nice because sometimes you don't know, you don't have that property on the object and you may want to reference it in a different way. So if you wanted to create a property, you could say event at some item equals foobar, right? And if some item's defined, whatever is found in these braces will be computed as well. So if some item were defined like const foo equals bar, const some item equals bar, this would be event.bar equals foobar, right? Why the braces, the brackets around the key property and not the value? Because the value, it's ES6. So in ES5, because you can do that on a property value. What's funny? You couldn't do that on the property in ES5. So on ES5, if I wanted to say new obj, and then set that equal to Ryan, I could already say event.target.name, right, or username, but I wasn't allowed in ES5 by design of the language to say on the property evaluate event.target.name, and this should be value, right? I wasn't allowed to do this. This was not valid syntax. You could not select properties this way. So in order to do that, the JavaScript team, whoever the ECMA team or the TC39 spec team, they got together and they said, hey, let's add this functionality to the language. And instead of recreating and giving the ability to do this like we didn't have before, let's just provide some special syntax around it. Yeah. You were in ES5 allowed to do this on the value, and you still are. We continue on with ES5 that way. You were not allowed to do it on the property, though, just by the way the language was designed. And I do not know the minds of the individuals who put it together that way, but I'm sure they're accessible online somewhere. You can go and find them and say, what's the beef? There are some things that are just the way they are, and we accept them. And unfortunately, that is part of the reason why JavaScript gets a lot of bad rep. Okay, any other questions? These are good things to go over for sure. These are beyond the basics. These are, I mean, they become rote is what I'm trying to say. They become part of your routine everyday life as you continue to use these items. But one of the coolest parts about using React is that you get a chance to write futuristic JavaScript. And the reason that there are new features in the JavaScript language is because they are either trying to solve problems that you did not know were there before, or they are trying to simplify your life. And for some reason, sometimes overcomplicate your life. But that's what's really cool about this space, is that we get futuristic JavaScript. Trevor said, it's not so much that I don't want to just accept stuff sometimes, it's that it's hard to tell apart the arbitrary cases from the cases where it's deeper, more systematic reason. Yeah, and there are going to be times, sometimes what I'm saying is that there are going to be times where I'm not going to be able to break those cases down for you. So either you'll have to dive into somebody like Kyle Simpson, you don't know JavaScript, because he loves to go real deep. Cool. Keith asked about the search functionality for day 2 tasks. Cool. Let's look at my janky solution for that. And I call it janky tongue-in-cheek. I don't always write the best code. Day 2 solution. Let me get there. Okay. Pulling it up. So my solution, in fact, somebody's probably got a much better solution than myself. But let's just look at the logic. So notice that one thing that I changed to the state here was that our original posts, when we call set state on component did mount, will be set to our dummy data. So this is the post that will be available on our original page. Now, as soon as somebody types into this function handler that we're passing down a search bar, we're going to start updating the post. So what I did is I just simply said, create a variable called this.state.post.filter. So let's filter through the posts. And this is going to return me a new array, right? Filter is going to give me a new array where the post itself includes what's being typed into that input field. And that's the posts. So any of the posts that match this logic, post.user, and this is filtering by username, Fortnite, right? Now there's an inherent bug with my problem, and it's that when actually that worked. But Can't scroll any further. So yeah, that one didn't come back. So there's a couple bugs in here, but this is like a janky, put it together use of filter where I just loop over the array and whatever comes into this input field, if this string includes that string of characters, includes is not the best. It's easy, but it's not the best. And then what I do is I say, oh, set those on filtered posts. So my posts here now get set here. So then how do I distinguish between whether somebody's searching and whether we're just loading the original posts? Well, I have some logic down here that says the posts that I'm going to pass to my post container are going to depend on whether or not there are posts in the filtered post array. So if the filtered post array's length is greater than 0, then the props that we're going to pass to post container are going to be the filtered posts. Otherwise, just pass the original posts. So that's the logic that you want to keep in mind for how to distinguish what posts to pass around. And then you could go and polish this and fix it up in your way. But yeah, stepping through this one more time, as a user types in the input field, we're going to get that event target value. And we're simply going to filter out the posts whose username does not include the value. So any of them that match will be returned to this array that we then set on filtered posts. Does that make sense, Keith? And if not, what kind of questions do you have around that? Yeah, sometimes, so that's not an easy task, especially for somebody who's new to programming in general, because there's a lot of things to keep in mind there. Number one is how do we delineate between the posts that we aren't filtered and the ones that are filtered? And then why would we want to choose this approach? Well, it's because when you originally load the posts, if you were to update this array and then reset it, then you're never going to be able to go back to that reset state. So just separate the two. What is better for includes than searching? Regular expressions. Have you guys heard of regex before? Okay. Regex is weird, but there's patterns that you can give to a regex. The syntax is weird about it. It's actually pretty straightforward. It's pretty awesome what they have. But there's match. Let's see. JS string.match. String.prototype.match. Okay. So here's what happens. Inside of a regular expression, you could use something like test or exec or match or whatever. I really like match because here's why. Here is our string, okay? Capital A to Z, lowercase a to Z. This is a regular expression, / the evaluation and then some rules, okay? But what's going to happen is we're going to get an array back of, when we call match, we're going to pass it our regular expression. Say, does the string have a match of this pattern that we give it? So as long as you learn a little bit of basic regex, you're going to get this to evaluate, right? So that's one you could use. You could use match, or you could use just basic regex as well. The reason that I say, oh, this is better than potentially what I came up with includes was because it'll be a little bit more performant. Regex tends to be pretty performant as long as you're doing it right. Thanks, Trevor, for the resource. That's perfect. In the day 2 solution, where does the search term come from? You know what? I don't know. I don't know. Since I'm not using it, let's say it comes from nowhere. It's kind of sad. I left in some code. I know where it comes from. When I originally implemented this, I had a string element. And then I would compare this instead with search term. I found that that was dumb because I could just pull it off of the value that's found in the input field. So I didn't need it. So because it's there, I'm actually going to save this now so no one ever sees that again. We're never using it anyway. Sorry about that. Cool. It's funny, I was actually listening to a podcast this morning with, it's the egghead.io podcast, and it was with the one of the maintainers of React who works on the React core team. And they were just talking about like how people can be super harsh in open source, and like sometimes you just make mistakes, and even the most advanced developers make mistakes. I wouldn't consider myself the most advanced developer. I have quite a few years of industry expertise, but I make mistakes all the time. And mistakes meaning clean up your code. I was passing something that didn't even exist. So I'm sorry about that. I'll be the first to admit that I'm here to make mistakes. That's why I work with you guys. Yeah, you'll find that Dustin is absolutely flawless. Okay. Any other questions? These are good things to review. I'll wait another 30 seconds or so. Good. Another question came in. With styled components, do we always have to import something, or can we style anything? You always will import styled, like the base class from styled components. And you can just import it right there into your document. But you can style virtually anything. I see. With the button example, we imported that from Bootstrap. So I need to make sure that I give you that as an example so you can see. Come on. For whatever reason, my terminal inside of VS Code is all borked. Here you go, Jonathan. So remember, the buttons came from React Bootstrap. The header we used as styled, the styled header function. Yeah, if you wanted to style your own image, you would follow this same idea. That's like 99% of the styles that I use for images, and wrap them around a container or whatever. But yeah. For styled components, are there standards that people follow for naming their components? Nope. There's no standard. Be semantic, as semantic as you would your components. Okay. So post container would be styled post container or whatever. And what's cool is you can write all these in line and then use them inside of your component and whatnot. If you wanted to append this image's style as like the background image, you could set it to, if props are defined, if props.src, or sorry, is a function, remember. So props.src is defined, then the background image would equal URL. You could build your own little, craft your own little idea here where URL equals, and this is me just totally spitballing right now, props.src, else use the alt tag or whatever. So that'd be kind of fun. Or yeah, src. I guess if you're using styles, you'd use background image or whatever. Is it, I'm going to say, better practice to define styled components before the class, or can you also do it in the render before return? You could. I would say do it outside, because 99% of the time, these styled components are going to exist in their own file, and you'll export them. Remember the React components. So I believe you still need to import React and then const styled, right? Maybe you don't need React. Ah, I learned something new. You don't need React for these components. It needs the React ecosystem to work. Yeah. But yeah, you just export these, and then, oh, I haven't imported them yet. Then I would import them as my own. Right, you could make one big global component library that you just import your consts. There you go. Ashton says, don't create styled components inside of render. It causes performance issues. All right, he read something or learned something that I didn't know. Yep, cool. Okay, gang. Have fun, work hard. You have all afternoon to just continue to take a whack at this, and then, oh, the first time ever you don't need to import React. Yeah, totally awesome. Keep playing, and yeah, you're well on your way to being prepared for the sprint challenge tomorrow. So feel free to reach out. Let us know if you need anything at all.